Hello once again, and welcome to another edition of the SaskAgToday.com Roundtable. I'm joined by 620 CKRM Regina Agri-News Director Ryan Young, as well as the Chief Agricultural Editor for SaskAgToday.com, Kevin Hirsch. I'm GX94 Yorkton Agriculture Director Doug Falconer. And the big news this week, gentlemen, was the fact that strychnine is being re-implemented, I guess, as a temporary measure, at least for the next couple of years in certain areas of the province. And Ryan, you had a chance to listen in on what David Merritt had to say about that.
Yeah, first off, he was pretty glad with the result of strychnine being reinstated on a temporary basis. Of course, lots of safeguards in place set by the federal government, but nonetheless, Merritt said he was happy to see that through, considering the lobbying efforts that they have undertaken over the last few years. Not only them, but Alberta as well, and some groups such as SARM and APAS. So those people are very glad to have that result. Now, as you mentioned, there's 7 crop districts that have been selected based on SAS crop insurance claims data that can use 2% liquid strychnine. Some areas in the southern part of the province, the east central portion, and one district in the northwest. Now, Merritt was asked if there would be more areas included later, and he said that's the hope for next year. It's just to get the ball rolling right now and just kind of be glad that, what they got right now. But nonetheless, they're looking to add more areas potentially for 2027. So additional details be worked out by the feds in terms of, application, how that goes from an RM perspective, especially. Those details, Merritt said, will be worked out in the next few weeks.
Yeah, I had a chance to speak with SARM President Bill Huber about it, and of course, he was pretty pleased with the fact that strychnine's going to be re-implemented for a couple of years. However, he did say that he did have concerns. He'd had some calls from people in southwestern Saskatchewan. He said some of the most heavily infested areas for Richardson ground squirrels aren't included on this list of crop districts that they released. He's speculating because it wasn't cropland, because a lot of it was ranch land and that sort of thing. Kevin, what are you hearing about it?
Well, I take an alternate view, and well, first of all, on the areas, Alberta has seemed to end up with a large contiguous area of the southern part of the province that all is going to be eligible for this emergency use. But as you mentioned, in Saskatchewan, they drew more lines around things. I happen to farm in the corner of 3 RMs and have land in all 3 RMs. 2 of those RMs are eligible for strychnine use. One is not. Apparently, the gophers didn't get the memo because there's a gopher problem in the land I have in the RM that isn't eligible. So I think there's going to be issues around that. Beyond that, I worry this is going to take a long time to roll out. There's talking about carcass removal and disposal, mandatory enhanced training. It's going to be a while before this strychnine is available. And really, people should be poisoning gophers now and in the next few weeks, because that's when you can get effective control. And I actually worry that at least in this first year, approval of strychnine may do more harm than good as far as getting a control of the gopher situation, because producers are more likely to be waiting for strychnine to finally become available when they could probably get a lot better control using products that are approved and using them now rather than waiting, because the early part of the season is really when the food supply for gophers is not available other sources, and they're more likely to eat the poison. It's also interesting to note that these proposals from Alberta and Saskatchewan went forward saying there's no other effective alternatives. Well, if you look right on the Saskatchewan Agriculture website, it talks about a study done in Saskatchewan and Alberta in 2022-2023 that said zinc phosphide was just as effective and cheaper than strychnine. So they were running to get a strychnine registration when their own website says other products are more applicable and don't have the problem of secondary poisoning. So I take, although it was widely applauded, the federal government's move and the PMRA move, I take an alternate view.
All right. And speaking of livestock in that southwestern area, the Canadian Cattle Association, you had a chance to speak with their CEO, Andrea Brocklebank, Ryan, on a number of topics this week.
Yeah, that's right. One of them, as of today, Thursday, was on trade. I asked her what the Canadian Cattle Association's expectations were for the upcoming review in July of the North American Trade Agreement. They said, or she said rather, that the CCA would like to see its status quo for the cattle industry, given that trade of beef between Canada and the United States, especially, is free. So they want to keep that as it is. So that's one of the bigger things. One of the concerns that she had on another related trade front was the possibility of Brazilian beef being imported into Canada. Now, currently, the federal government is trying to intensify trade talks between the South American trade bloc to get some more trade deals as part of their ongoing efforts to diversify and be less reliant on the United States as a trading partner. And they hope to have something in place by the end of this year. But again, one of the concerns being on the agricultural side, beef imports from Brazil. She said that there's a lot of differences between Canadian beef and Brazilian beef, and how the finish is done, the process, standards, etc. So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered on that front from her vantage point. Another notable thing we talked about this week was the traceability regulation changes that were proposed by the CFIA. I interviewed her on Friday prior to the CCA's official announcement on their official stance on the proposed changes. And obviously, they're not in support of said proposed changes. So, not really a surprise there, given the feedback that they've gotten from other cattle groups and producers. So, that was the second thing. And then the third thing was with regards to the Alberta beef producers, ongoing talks between the CCA and ABP to keep the Alberta beef producers as a member of the national organization. Some of the concerns that ABP had, for those that don't know, include financial transparency and a little bit more involvement in the decision-making process. They feel that some more Alberta representation is necessary, considering that they fund over half of the CCA's budget through their beef checkoff. So she said that talks are progressing well. They're heading in the right direction. One of the things that was proposed was instituting a financial treasurer or a financial chairperson, as well as a governance committee. So those things still need to be worked out. But again, she said that things are heading in the right direction, even though we're coming up on the deadline here of July 1st is when APB is officially set to withdraw, but will fulfill all financial obligations until June 30th. So lots of ground covered there, but for next week, we'll still have plenty more to discuss.
Kevin, three separate topics there from the CCA CEO. Your thoughts?
Well, the traceback, I think the CCA and I think a lot of the cattle associations, including provincially, especially Saskatchewan Cattle Association, are playing a bit of catch up. I think they underestimated the pushback and the concern over traceability that was evident at the grassroots. Some of that might have been based a little bit on misconception, but it was after all of the feedback came pouring in that the associations decided that, yes, we're not going to support the traceability proposals, but there is a bit of a rift between a lot of the grassroots and the organizations. One other comment regarding Brazilian beef, and it's just not something we think about a lot. We oftentimes will hear complaints about the supply managed industries and how we don't let in product, milk and poultry from other countries. We have quotas on them, and we do allow a little bit of Brazilian beef in, but really we've got a closed border. And somebody that's a pure free enterpriser might argue that, well, let the product come in and let consumers decide whether they want cheaper Brazilian beef or whether they want Canadian beef. I think the real sticking point in that argument, though, is that we have to realize that we're in an integrated market with the United States. And if we were to allow unfettered access for Brazilian beef into Canada, our major trading partner, the US, would be very upset, believing that's just displacing Canadian beef that ends up going to the US. So it's a difficult balancing act, but I don't think a lot of people have thought about it, in that we really do have quotas from many countries around the world on how much beef can be brought into Canada.
Another story we had this week, of course, is the fact that as of this recording, the war in the Middle East is continuing to rage on. And Kevin, you had a chance to speak with a person involved with a sulfur company.
Yeah, the company is BusySol, out of one of the major suppliers of elemental sulfur in Alberta. It supplies the Canadian market, one of the suppliers to the Canadian market. And something that we've talked about a lot is that we realize diesel prices have spiked, nitrogen fertilizer prices have spiked because of the Middle East war and the blockade at the Strait of Hormuz. Let's talk about sulfur fertilizer and all of the things that sulfur goes into. Sulfur is also blocked. It's a byproduct mainly of oil refining. 40% of it comes out of the Strait of Hormuz. You need it to make sulfuric acid for batteries. You need that sulfuric acid in all sorts of metal mining, whether it's copper to gold. You also need it to use with phosphate rock for phosphate fertilizer. So there's a lot of ramifications as this ongoing conflict in the Middle East disrupts supply chains. And even though phosphate is not a product that's being exported out of the Middle East, it too is being affected because of the relationship to sulfur and sulfuric acid.
All right. And of course, also this week, it became official that UFA purchased AgraCity. And Ryan, you had a chance to speak with the president and CEO of UFA on that.
Yeah, I talked to Fred Toon just to kind of get the additional details on how much they bought AgraCity for and what was included all in the deal. So the final purchase price was $48.2 million. And of that, 13 million is going towards a fertilizer distribution plant in Belle Plaine. About $35 million towards several other assets, such as a distribution and packaging center in Saskatoon, distribution fleet, among other things. And one of the key pieces as well is $20 million allocated to what he called make-whole arrangements for farmers who were owed product from AgraCity, so ordering product and paid but had not received the product. So that's what the $20 million is designed for. He was feeling pretty good, obviously. This had been a culmination of 3 months or more going through the bankruptcy process and allowing the opportunity for other companies to put a bid in on AgraCity to try and buy it. UFA was considered what's called a stalking horse bidder, with a first right to refusal. So they had a base bid of $20 million, and they had the right to try to eclipse any best offer by $2 million. So at the end of it, they were the ones to come out with AgraCity. And I also asked him about what the next steps were in the short term, so 3 to 6 months. He said that'll include rebranding, visiting all of the AgraCity employees in Belle Plaine and other locations to give them an opportunity to stay on with UFA and continue doing business. So still a little bit of work ahead, but again, feeling good that this process is finally over.
Kevin, your reaction to the news that UFA has purchased the assets of AgraCity?
I think it's really good news for producers on a couple of counts. One is that producers that were owed money or owed product are going to be made whole, and I think that's be a major relief to those producers knowing that. The other thing is that there's another generic crop protection product company out there, and there are many others marketing generic products, but the marketplace is large. Generics are becoming more and more important as most of the major products are coming off patent. So having not lost the supplier, just one supplier replaced by another major company with the kind of reach that UFA has is good news for competition in the marketplace.
And another event that happened on April 1st was the Saskatchewan Animal Enforcement Agency took over in Saskatchewan. Ryan, you had a chance to sift through some news conferences on that.
That's right. From what I could gather, not really a whole lot of difference between them and their predecessors, the Animal Protection Services of Saskatchewan, the latter of which ceased operations as of March 31st, and the Animal Enforcement Agency taking over the following day. Some of the differences I heard from the new CEO of the agency was that they're going to have a little bit more of a educational and empathetic approach to dealing with animal wellness cases. They're planning on adding a few more workers, mainly part-time individuals, so that'll increase their staff from the current 10 to 14. So those were kind of the major points, bullet points, shall we say, of the agency.
Kevin, your reaction to this new agency taking over?
From a producer's point of view, typically you don't hear much about it, you don't realize much about it, but every now and then there will be a high-profile case that hits the news. In many cases, animal welfare issues can be solved by talking and working with the producer. In some cases, though, because of mental illness or severe financial hardship, there are really bad cases that have to be actually litigated or animals removed or action taken, and those are the ones over time. Every now and then some of those hit the news, but there is certainly a need for such an agency doing a job and monitoring all of the complaints. Unfortunately, they have to filter out the complaints that are legitimate from the ones that are not legitimate, but very necessary to have a strong organization for animal welfare.
Also on April 1st, an announcement from the federal government regarding the advance payments program, and it sounds like there's some good news on that front for farmers as well, Kevin.
Yes, certainly, and we've certainly become used to this. In fact, usually it drags on into April, and there's a lot of lobbying to raise the cash advance limit, the interest-free portion of that. It's set in legislation at $100,000 as interest-free cash advance, but for many years now that has been raised sometime in April or leading into the spring period, and that's the case this year. It's going to be $250,000 again as an interest-free cash advance. On top of that, because of a previous announcement on specifically canola, there will be an additional $500,000 in cash advance available interest-free. So the $250,000 increase is actually a non-canola cash advance, because canola has been set aside for 2025, 2026 as a separate case because of the issues that existed with Chinese tariffs previously. But certainly good news, and for producers that, especially those that have an operating line of credit and have to pay significant interest rates on this. This is a really money-saving opportunity for them to be able to utilize the cash advance. And of course, the numbers we mentioned, those are the maximum for interest-free portion. Producers can also borrow above that up to $1 million, paying interest on that amount. And also to get those maximum amounts, they have to have the necessary security, which at this time of the year, before you have the stored grain, you have either crop insurance or AgraStability that you're actually using as security. And it's not a completely free ride. There is a administration fee or eligibility fee that, depending upon the supplier of the advance payments program, I've seen it range from $400 to $500 per application, but that's still fairly minor compared to the interest you can save.
And finally this week, Do More Ag Foundation put out a news release about people being able to apply for some events. Ryan, you had a chance to speak with Merle Massey on that.
That's right. So the application window is open as of earlier this week, and the deadline to apply is April 30th. So Basically, who they're looking for to apply is any community group that's in a rural agricultural community can apply for this sort of community fund. So that could be like a Kinsman Club or a Lions Club or something like that. They can apply for this. And she said that those who get approval, they'll cover the cost of the logistics side of things for taking their Talk, Ask, Listen workshop to the community. So the funding will cover the booking of a venue like a Legion Hall or another venue, as well as food and other logistics. And then Do More Ag and Farm Credit Canada, who they have a partnership with on this fund, will cover the cost of the workshop and the featured speaker for said workshop. So it sounds like a really good deal when it comes to bringing mental health education to local communities. And she said that these are designed to, just start the conversation and get the conversation rolling. Depending on the community's needs, these workshops can go from an hour all the way up to 4 hours or 3 hours. So again, it all depends on what the community needs and what the topic might be. It could be, if you're in the Southwest, it could be drought, or in another area, it could be a flood or fire, or losing a well-known person within the community. Whatever the topic may be, provides an opportunity to kind of have an open conversation about that and really help people understand, the difficult topic of mental health challenges and how to go about addressing them at best. So for those that want to apply, you can head over to the Do More Ag website. It's basically on the front page there. You can't miss it. Again, the deadline is April 30th.
Kevin, it's refreshing to hear that mental health in agriculture is becoming more of an acceptable topic.
It certainly is. That's been a dramatic change in recent years. And Ryan and I actually at Canada's Farm Show had a chance to meet and talk with Merle Massey during a Sask Farm Writers Association get-together, a very dynamic individual, and I think she'll be great for that organization and great for elevating the awareness about mental health issues.
All right, well, that'll do it for this week's edition of the SaskAgToday.com Roundtable. On behalf of the Chief Agricultural Editor for SaskAgToday.com, Kevin Hirsch, and the 620 CKRM Regina Agri-News Director, Ryan Young, I'm GX94 Yorkton Agriculture Director, Doug Falconer, saying so long until next time.